Hello everyone, this is Michael with Harvey Jewelry Designs, and today we'll be going over how to make a bezel setting. This here is a plain bezel, 28th inch, 28 gauge plate. Up next we have a serrated bezel, it's a 1/8 inch as well, 28 gauge. We have a 3/16, 28 gauge serrated bezel. We have some gallery wire that I sometimes use as a bezel or for decorative. Another one that's a little bit wider as well. These are a little bit thicker. They run, I think, probably about 26 gauge, I think. About 26? I don't think they're 24, so. And these are all the bezels that I use most often. The one that I use the most is definitely going to be the serrated bezel, which we'll be using today. Here you can see where the jagged teeth are. On the other side, I consider this the inside. You can see where the jagged teeth are. The cut is a little bit sharper. On the other side, it has more of a rounded edge, so I use this side right here as the outside. I think it just looks nicer. But either way, you won't really be able to tell. So this here is the gallery wire. Obviously, that's the other side is the outside. This is the inside. But today we're going to be using the 3/16 serrated bezel. The cabs today that we'll be using will be an oval and a rectangle or square. That is a turquoise and labradorite. We'll also be using a scribe and a pencil. Flat nose pliers, a torch starter or spark, and then a pair of scissors, and of course your torch. I'm using my Prestolite. And most importantly, your hands, obviously. That's going to get started. Alright, so we're going to start off with our oval cabochon, which is definitely probably the easiest. This here is a labradorite. It's a little thick, so the 1/8 bezel is going to be a little bit too small. So today we're going to use the 3/16, which is a little bit wider. But if it's too wide, then we can, after we solder it, then we can use a sandpaper to sand it down to the correct height. So first, you just want to hold your cabochon. Kind of make sure that's the end of it is square. If not, then you can use a pair of scissors to snip it off and make sure that it's nice and square. Alright, once you get that square, hold your cabochon and your bezel, and you're just going to simply wrap it around. And once you get it wrapped all the way around, you want to make sure that it's nice and snug. You don't want it super tight. You want to make it just a smidge longer, because if you cut it too short, then obviously you're not going to be able to use it. You're going to have to cut another piece of your bezel. So it's best to make it just a little longer, and then you can trim it down or file it down, and then lay it on your work surface, hold it down, and use a pencil to mark where you're going to cut it. Sometimes I use a pencil, sometimes I use my scribe. It's usually whatever's closest. And my pencil is usually in my ear, so. And once you snip it, you can just use flat nose pliers to flatten it out. And then from there you can check to see if it's flush, meets up nicely. If it's, most likely it's going to be a little bit too long, that's fine. Then you can just file it down. Next, we're going to use the same bezel, 3/16, to make a bezel setting for our rectangle cab here. What I did was I used my flat nose pliers to make a bend in it, so I get a nice clean bend. And then I just use that on one corner, use that off as my starting point. And then I'm going to get my pliers again, and I'm going to hold it up against this side. You'll see here in just a second. Get my pliers and hold it up against the cab. Let's make sure it's nice and flush with it. Remove the cab, and then you're just going to hold it there, and then remove the cab. Make a bend, so you get a nice clean bend, and it will fit your cab a lot easier around the corner. It's so much easier using a flat nose pliers to make those bends around the corner of a square cab or a rectangle. You just get a lot of, or a cleaner bend in it, as opposed to just trying to use your fingers. And then once you get the fit, I like to flip it over and check the other side just to make sure that I get a nice snug fit. And then I'm going to use my scribe to mark it. Nice clean fit. Mark it with your scribe, and I'm going to make it a little bit longer, and then I can file it down to size. Because if I tend to cut it right where it meets up with the other end, then I always end up cutting it too short. So, alrighty, let's go and get started with the oval cabochon. This here is my third hand, and that's super handy. You don't necessarily have to have it, and then also some hard solder. And I like to flatten it down with a hammer. It just makes it easier because it'll lay in one spot and not roll off. So, and I'm just going to snip a tiny piece off and put that to the side. And then I am going to file the ends so I can get a nice clean seam, and they'll meet up. I'm going to go ahead and anneal my bezel. That's just going to make it easier to work with. Without it annealed, it tends to spring back and makes it a little bit more difficult. So this just makes it a little bit easier. Once it's cooled enough to touch, go ahead and line it up. And then prop it up with your third hand. Just make sure that it's still flush. Add some flux. And here I have that little piece of hard solder. What I'm going to do is make a little circle on my work surface on the right. This is just so I don't lose it, because I always tend to lose my solder. I'll put it in that circle just so I know exactly where it is when I have my torch lit. Okay, low flame. And I'm going to start from the bottom of the solder, not where the seam is, because once you heat it up from the bottom, you see it already started to bubble and foam where the flux is, and then I put my solder on there. It just makes it easier, because once it bubbles and foams, then if I had my solder on there, it tends to jump off. I'm just going to heat it evenly, and then once it gets hot, then I'm going to kind of concentrate my heat where the seam is until the solder melts. Of course, you have to be super careful, because it's really easy to melt the solder, so I've done that so many times, and I still do it. So once it's cool enough to touch, give a little tug just to make sure that it's soldered really well. And then I'm going to get my cab and make sure it fits. Alright, well, that concludes this tutorial. Thank you so much for checking it out. Please give us a follow on Instagram at Harvey Jewelry Design. And you can also follow my sister, Crystal Harvey. I'll be sure to leave our links in the description. Thank you so much. Take care.